Thanks for giving me the time to talk at the user meeting here, and hopefully you'll all stick around and have some energy for the very last talk. But I think it's going to be an exciting topic. I've been going off the last year basically to do a postdoc at Stanford University, and before that I did a PhD in energy systems modeling, where I worked with PyPSA and PyPSA User. And now I've gone off and basically applied a lot of the same methodology in food systems. So I kind of jokingly called this talk Python for food system analysis, but it's going to be about this model that I built on top of PyPSA that I've ended up calling GLADE for global land agriculture, diet, and emissions. And this is work together with Steve Davis and Ken Caldera at the Department of Earth System Science. Let's dive right in. So why do we even care about the food system? Why don't we all just work on energy all the time? Well, it represents, or it accounts for roughly a third of all global greenhouse gas emissions, which is very significant. And in terms of just emissions profile, the food system is rather understudied compared to energy systems, I would say. But then the food system touches on all these other things as well. And for our first study, we were especially interested in dietary health. And so here I've compared the dietary health burden with, for example, tobacco smoking and high alcohol use. And you see that they're of comparable magnitude. About 70 million years of life are lost every year to dietary health burden, which is mostly in terms of cardiovascular diseases. There's also biodiversity impacts of the food system, of course, through land use, water use, all kinds of other things. And so we want to have a model of the food system where we're able to study these trade-offs between cost, climate, health, and other factors. Now, the food system is really a kind of flow network. And food is a kind of energy, just calories, right? But really, the food system is a kind of flow network of masses going around. And so you can compare it a little bit to a power system, and where we might have like a power plant in the power system, we would have a plot of land in the food system, right? And it produces a kind of commodity like wheat, and there'll be some conversion going on. So you have to mill this wheat into flour, and then finally this goes into the diet. And so this is the kind of scope of the model. I'm modeling everything from plots of land producing crops to foods being consumed, diets globally. Now, things are a little bit more complicated than this, and these crop production links actually have lots of inputs and outputs, but this is quite easy to represent in PyPSA. Now, I know I should migrate to the new process component probably, but we use links for now. And so one crop will take land and water to produce, actually fertilizer also, I put it on the slide. So, and we'll produce, crops, but also crop residues, and also emissions, right? And here we account for methane and nitrous oxide emissions, but also CO2 emissions from land use change. And we also model the livestock sector or animal products. And so you'll have corresponding kind of animal links, which take in feed and produce animal products and manure and emissions as well. And the whole sort of at a conceptual level, the mass flow in the model looks something like this. And now I should say, and I'll show you later as well, that this model is very much spatially resolved, but here I'm showing this at an aggregated level. So we have kind of our primary inputs on the left, which are water, fertilizer, and land. And these combine to produce crops. There's also grassland in here. Both crops and grassland can be used as animal feed as well as crop residues. And this feed is the input for animal production. And both crops and animal production make for food, which then goes into the diet. And then for this first study, we were interested in health impacts as well. So we kind of model health as a function of diet. And then, of course, we have our emissions accounting framework in the model. So a whole bunch of these different processes, especially like land use, crop production, animal production, lead to various kind of emissions with all kinds of different emission factors. And then we combine all these different emissions into CO2 equivalent greenhouse gas emissions. So we really get one number out, total emissions in CO2 equivalents, and also one number in terms of dietary health impacts globally. And then we can compare these. And you might wonder, why the heck did I use PyPSA for this? Because this is very much not a power system. But really, the PyPSA framework is very nicely suited to these kind of network flow type optimization problems. Because it has buses that balance mass, it has the link components, it has generators and loads. They're all power agnostic to the units, so you can use any kind of material or flow, right? And of course, you could use some package like Pyoma or LinoPy directly to encode all these constraints, but that's just extra work. And in addition, PyPSA gives you these nice bonuses of I/O management, like you can easily save networks, you can easily put additional information on links that makes the analysis downstream easier. It has the statistics module, etc. So there's just a lot of batteries included. And if you have a background in energy systems modeling like I do, then you already know the tool. So that was certainly a reason for me to pick this. It's also nice that LinoPy provides solver flexibility, right? So we can use either Gurobi or open source solvers like Heis. And the workflow for data preparation and model building in GLADE was very much inspired by PyPSA. Here I'm showing an extremely simplified representation. And so in the end, I built this global food system model, and you can think about this basically like PyPSA Earth for food. And really most of the work went into compiling data sets. Of course, this is where all the difficulty lies, because we need a good baseline for what the food system looks like currently. Before you can even start optimizing, like you want to start from today's situation. And that's actually quite tricky. There's a lot of different data sources going into, what kind of crops are being grown, but also like what are people eating around the world? What are animals eating around the world? Nobody knows, basically. This data is extremely patchy, but I tried to patch it together somehow. And we have a usable baseline system. And yeah, there are other models like this out there, but they are not fully open. They're the ones I've seen are written in GUMS mostly. So this is the first fully open global food system model for now that I'm aware of. And now we can start asking interesting questions. So I'll just show you a very small preview of the kind of thing that we can start to look at with this kind of model. And here I'm not even focusing on the health part, but just asking if you want to reduce food system emissions, does it even matter, or how much does it matter if you allow dietary change? Because in this optimization model, we can now put in a carbon price or a social cost of carbon, put this into the optimization, see how the model responds. And so on the left here, you see how emissions drop as a function of social cost of carbon in a scenario with constant diet and in a scenario with a flexible diet. And we see that actually the amount of emissions reduction you can get even in a scenario with a constant diet is surprisingly substantial. We can get the food system into negative emissions territory without changing anything about how we eat. And this is mostly due to rebalancing of feed composition in the animal sector. Because animals, cows especially, eat a lot of grass. This grass takes up a lot of land. And basically some of this land that's used for grazing currently has a very high carbon sequestration potential. And so if you let this land reforest, then that would lead to a lot of carbon sequestration, and you can compensate for this elsewhere. If you want to explore the results in more detail, I actually made this interactive display on the documentation, and here you have a carbon price slider, and you'll see how the system responds. And on the map here, you see how much less pasture land is being used. And you can also slide diet around. Further down here, we see what the food or diet situation looks like. But I would encourage you to play around with this yourself after the talk. And just some general reflections before I wrap up here. I think food system modeling is quite a long way behind energy systems modeling, which makes it a very exciting field to work in. There's basically no open models apart from this one now. There's a lot of interesting questions that are to be asked. There's a lot of potential for methods transfer. And so, yeah, I would encourage you to think about exploring the field if you are so inclined. And that's it for me. Thanks so much for your attention. And I'm hoping for some interesting questions and discussion. And I should say there's a preprint out on this topic on arXiv. I can link to that in the chat as well.
Very interesting. Very interesting application of Python for the global food system. Now we will be having some questions. Let's have this one from Nathan. Have you done any validation, for example, looking at model versus historical food production per region or country?
Yeah, so the validation was a big part of the development of this model. And basically what we can do is to fix production patterns to known 2020 baselines, and also fix consumption patterns to known 2020 baselines, and then see if things balance out in a way. And you get some small imbalances because the data are not perfect, but this is a way of at least validating the internal flow of commodities in the model. But actually, if you then run the model in a sort of free optimization mode, it gives you a very different production pattern from what we have today. And that largely reflects the fact that today we produce food in a very suboptimal way. And that's essentially due to kind of inertia and trade frictions. And so in the model, there's a kind of, I've implemented a kind of deviation cost where it costs the model something to deviate away from today's situation, and that allows you to run it in optimization mode, but starting at today's situation. Hopefully that answers the question somewhat.
Yeah. Thank you. I think one last question. This might be very insightful too. When you move animals from grazed grass toward higher productivity regions, does it mean more intensive farming or something else?
Yeah, so it depends what you mean with more intensive, but yeah, essentially it does mean having essentially the same amount of animals or slightly fewer on smaller pieces of land. It all depends though, right? Like there's a lot of animals today that basically are just independent their whole life and don't have any kind of land access. And then there's a lot of, and then there's some animals that have access to a lot of land. For instance, this kind of extensive rangeland grazing where you have low productivity grassland and maybe 1 cow per square kilometer or so. Really where you see in the model a move away from grassland though is in tropical regions where there's good reforestation potential, where there would be a high carbon sequestration if you reforested this land. And in tropical regions, there's a lot of land which has been deforested for livestock raising in the last decades. Think about Brazil, for instance, and rainforest deforestation there. So it would be a good start to reforest areas that have been deforested in the last 20 years.